Okay, you're live. Well, Facebook, I am sorry about the quality of the video picture. And it's truly not spectacular, so not really. I am looking into getting an external camera for my laptop because the quality of the picture is like I've played with all the settings and it just is still stinky. I've done all the light setups and I've done all the stuff and it's just stinky. Anyway, Instagram's not too bad because that's on my iPad, and so like Apple products, right? Am I right? Whew, here we are. As you can see, I'm also in a new space, which you may have noticed. Yeah, new space. Blue wall. Feature wall. Still not really sure what to do with all the things back there. It's gonna be great when I have it all figured out. But, whew, here we go. So, hey, welcome to some live office hours with me, Dr. Shannon Coates. I am, oh, thank you, Bianca. I do too. I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to be in a space. Here's the thing. I'm so thrilled to be in a space where I can close the door. It's my own space. I can close the door. I was, up until the beginning of this year, I was working, I had a studio space in the sort of front room of my house, which is terrific. It's wonderful. I love it. It's a beautiful space. And at the same time, and it did have doors, but they were like French doors, you know, like, so I could kind of close myself in, but it was also the living space of, so, you know, of the people in my family. So, gosh, Facebook, I am so sorry. I think at some point, try to just get that like balance a little better. Dang, it's not great. Anyway, someday I'll have like shutters in here too, so I'll be able to control the light a little bit better. But anyway. So the downstairs space, yes. Once I realized, oh, hey, I'm probably never going to, have someone in person in this space again. In other words, I don't need like a full studio space that's accessible from my front door. I can just like take over that room upstairs. So then I did. And it's terrific to have my own space. Ooh, it's terrific. Anyway, so here we are, Dr. Shannon Coates, coming to you live. I am a little north of Toronto in Canada, and I live and work on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Wendat-Wet'suwet'en peoples. And something that reminded me, someone is reading this book, and I can't remember who now. Allison, it might be you. Anyway, someone's posted about reading Indian Horse, this book, and so I wanted to just kind of bring it up today as part of land acknowledgement and understanding who we are in the space that we live and work on. And so this is Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese, and this was the Canada Reads 2013 selection. So anyone in Canada may actually know this book already. If you're not in Canada, this is like full disclosure, I have yet to be able to finish it. I'm even starting to cry right now, just thinking about it. Just it's a really personal and deeply touching, and will make you really rethink some things. Account of someone who was in residential schools, and yes, so yeah, this is Saul Indian Horse is in trouble, and there seems to be only one way out. As he journeys back through his life as a northern Ojibwe, from the horrors of residential school to his triumphs on the hockey rink, he must question everything he knows. Something to consider if you are interested in understanding who and what, and especially sort of history of residential schools and Native Indigenous folks in Canada specifically. So something to consider. And interestingly, what we're talking about today is that learning is not predicated on reading, even though I just recommended a book there, but learning not predicated on reading. And I wanted to talk about this because of some of the things that I've been, posting recently, and some of the things that have been kind of coming around the internet, around short form content, and the fact that we tend to, this is sort of our society right now, we tend to get a lot of information in short form content, meaning like a Facebook post or an Instagram post or Twitter, which is this long, or, small articles, or even, blog posts or things like that. So we tend to get, or just, scrolling through highlights in the news or something like that. So we tend to get information from sort of short form content. And this is just, this isn't necessarily negative or positive. It isn't necessarily bad or good. It's just about what are the consequences of only getting our information in short form content. And then along with that discussion continues to be this kind of discussion around what is the best way to get your learning, right? And what's the preferenced way to learn or to get information? What's your sort of what's the best way to get information? And in general, we tend to have imposed what tends to be said in general is that the best way to get information and the preferenced way is to read, and to read long form content. So reading books and texts and longer articles and all that kind of thing. And I just wanted us to take a minute to think a little bit about that and to consider some of the things that idea entails. And this kind of sinks into us, right? Like, this is something that we kind of take on. I know I mentioned in some of my posts previously this week that I grew up hearing the readers are the leaders, and my paternal family especially is very well known for, all my cousins, not all of my cousins, many of my cousins are like super readers. Some of them are writers, and, and that's wonderful. And that my father's side of the family is sort of very well known as being, readers and preachers and teachers and all that stuff too. So, and that's wonderful. And I read early, and I heard, as I was growing up, I heard, the readers are the leaders, and there's nothing, inherently wrong with reading, obviously. And so when I start to talk about, you don't have to get all your learning, or even most of your learning, from reading. You don't have to from long form reading. You don't have to. You can still be a leader if you're not getting your information from reading. So when I start to talk about that, and start to say to people, if you feel guilty because you're getting your, sorry, my hair is all weird. If you feel guilty because you're getting your information in ways that are other than reading, I just don't want you to feel guilty. I don't think you should. I think you're allowed to say, hey, this is the way that works best for me. And when I start to say things like that, which, by the way, I've been saying things like that. I found one of my first lives when I was talking about, I think the name of the live, and then I made a blog post about it, but I think the name of the live was like 8 ways to get your voice pad learning without reading a voice pad text. So that was back in 2018, might have been 2019, but I've been talking about this for, a while. I've been talking about this for a while. So it's not that this is something brand new where I'm like, this is something that I've been considering for quite a while. And again, coming from the place, Bianca says, I'm a reader, writer, learner, but my world was rocked when I discovered that 2 of my children and my husband are kinesthetic learners. Yes, changed your teaching too, right? I mean, there is, like the sort of learning style stuff isn't quite like we're pretty sure that that's not a great model necessarily, right, for how people learn, just because people learn in so many different ways. But yes, I totally get it, right? So I was raised in a very much heavy emphasis on reading, and that was like, preferred, and like you could stay up all night if you wanted to, if you were reading. Right? Yeah. So there are lots of different things, but like, so I could stay up all night if I wanted to, if I was reading. Now, if I stayed up all night and watched movies or watched TV, I was going to be like, I got in trouble for that. But if I stayed up all night reading, no problem. So there was, this was like a preferenced way to use your time and to, and of course also, so I have that background, and I also, I have like a terminal degree. Like I have a doctorate, I hold a doctorate. So yeah, I did some reading, and interestingly enough, my doctoral thesis, got someone in here telling me I look beautiful. Well, thank you. That's not what this is about, but thanks. So my doctoral thesis was on terminology, and I read a whole bunch of voice ped texts, and I surveyed a whole bunch of texts. So not only am I in academia, but also, there's been a lot of reading in my life. And so that's not an issue. I don't I grew up saying and thinking that in order to be an intelligent person, in order to be an academic person, in order to be a leader, you needed to be a reader. And I grew up conflating intelligence with reading. I grew up conflating maybe even good people with reading. I grew up conflating those two, right? Having that getting your learning through reading is the no. Getting your learning through reading is the best way to get your learning on. So I grew up with that, and so when I start to talk about the fact that there are alternative ways to learn, and that there are so many ways to learn, give me a second here, let me just see if I can. No. Okay. That there are alternative ways to learn, and that they are equally valid. When I start to say stuff like that, and when I start to, and like you, Bianca, my world was really turned around when I started to see folks in my family who are, who don't love to get information through reading, but who are freaking incredibly smart people. Very intelligent people who are, okay, so this started to change the way that I thought about things. Anyway, sorry. So when I do start to talk about these things, and like I said, I've been talking about this for a while, but when I do start to talk about these things, and I start to say, hey, if you aren't getting your learning, and specifically, obviously, in the voice pedagogy, in that realm, if you're not getting your voice pedagogy learning in by reading voice texts, voice ped texts, that's cool, and it's okay. You're still good. You're still a good teacher. It's all good. Sometimes that can be misconstrued as me being like anti-books, maybe, or of me being maybe anti-academia or anti-intelligence, or anti-intelligent, or being on some kind of anti-research or anti-science. I don't know. It kind of seems to get construed or misread in some cases, right? So so that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about that today, is just to say that this isn't about that, right? What is this about? What is this about? This is about the fact that that we have preferenced reading. And in VoicePed, we put this, preference on, voice pedagogues being the ones who have written a VoicePed text, or who have, who are doing the who are putting all of these things into words and who have ingested and then ingested all of the textbooks that have come and then put them into put it into a new kind of textbook. I mean, that is one way to be a voice pedagogue, if you will. And certainly that is a way, but it's not the only way, and it's not even necessarily the best way. It's just a way, right? So consider with me some of the ways that some of the, who originally, where does this come from? This comes a little bit from and of course, there's no way to unpack all of this in, here. You need a documentary or maybe 7-series podcast or something, or a book. But consider where this comes from, right? So who were the people who were originally considered worthy to learn how to read? Well, women weren't really considered right? Yes, we're all learning even more. I agree. When we broaden our understanding of how others learn, we all learn even more. Yes, exactly. Who are the people who were originally considered worthy, if you will, of being educated through reading, and who were considered, so priests and people of the cloth, and I'm talking Western civilization because that's really what I know, but people of the cloth, and then boys were educated, and then and then it became only the people in the city, farmers couldn't because they had to go home, and farmers couldn't stay in school because they had to go home and do the crops, or this is very generalized, very, very generalized. But consider who the people are, and then folks who could pay for school, and folks who could pay for tutors, and folks who could. So it became this, it comes down to us, if you will, with this kind of idea of the people who are, the people, only the best people can read, and only the top of the society can read, and maybe the most civilized people can read. And so all of these kind of things, this kind of legacy kind of comes down, and we have then in our current society, and in voice pedagogy and in academia, we have this kind of understanding. We've taken this on where we say, well, the readers are the leaders, or the people who read to get information are clearly the most intelligent, are clearly doing it the right way, etc. And again, the reading is great. I'm nothing against it, obviously. But when we preference reading as the only way to learn, or as the best way to learn, or the best way to get information, and we preference that long-term or long-form content, when we say we need to get away from short-form content, or we need to have more long-form content in our lives, which I don't disagree with, and then we say, and so you should be reading more books, that isn't necessarily true, right? If you want more long-form content in your life, there are so many ways, especially today, that you can get long-form content in your life. And I wanted to just validate a few things too. I wanted to say, there are so many reasons that folks don't enjoy getting their information or their learning from reading. I mean, there's so many reasons. There are processing differences. Folks with dyslexia, for example, that can be challenging. I mean, I'm not talking about folks who, I'm talking about folks who can read. I'm not talking about folks who, who have a barrier to reading in that way. I'm talking about folks who can read, but the processing of it is very challenging. And so getting information from reading is actually very frustrating and challenging, and it doesn't accomplish anything. And don't actually get the information, I just end up frustrated. So there's attentional differences. Folks who aren't, who's, again, that's a processing thing as well. That's a neurodivergence, where the brain is not working to keep that attention for that kind of long form content. There are just time things, right? So If you are teaching a full studio and you teach all year long and you take your vacations and you have a full house as well, or you're a single person and you are working to have a full business, or you are someone who is also parenting, or you are someone who is looking after aging parents, or you are someone who, there are so many other things that go into being, that go into our lives, where we, and the thing we tell ourselves is, oh, if I would make time for the things I really wanted to do. So that is something that I heard growing up too. You will always make time for the things you really want to do. And you know what? That's not fracking true. That reminds me of that saying of like, we all have the same 24 hours in our lives. It's just not true. It's not true. Yes, we all have 24 hours, or 24 hours in our day. Yes, there is 24 hours in every one of our days. But the quality of that time and my ability to to fully access that time, that is different from person to person. We don't all have the same access to those 24 hours and to be able to use those 24 hours in specific ways. It's just not true. It's not true. Same with if you really wanted to do something, you would prioritize it. Well, that has made me feel guilty about my life choices my entire life. So I just want to tell you, look, if reading is not a great way for you to get information, you're not going to prioritize it in your life, even if you want to. Why would you? And that's fine. You're allowed to say, hey, I don't get information easily from reading. What are the things that I actually find myself getting information? How am I actually finding myself getting information here? Oh, I actually love watching documentaries. I actually really enjoy listening to podcasts. I love listening to books. Like, that might be something that you do, right? Like, my issue with listening to books is that I always then want to buy the book because I'm like, oh, that was really good. I want to underline it. So like listening to books isn't so great for me. I have to listen to fiction if I want to listen to books, because I can't listen to nonfiction. And so podcasts, documentaries, like all of these things are available. Audible, you can listen to Audible books, to books on Audible. That's what it's called, right? But then there are also ways to get information, like going to conferences or signing up for classes, signing up for courses, signing up for conferences. All of those things are great ways to get information as well. This relationship between, or this kind of like equivalency that we have put on reading and intelligence, like, let me just make sure I'm saying the right thing here. Intellect. So like, someone with intellect, yes, exactly, Bianca. Just chat to anyone parenting young children without privileges of external support. 100%. If you're parenting young children, you may prioritize reading and you may get lots of reading in if you love it, and that's a great way for you to get information. But if it's not a great way for you to get information, why would you prioritize it? And then why would you feel bad if you don't? Don't feel bad about it. Recognize that that's not a great way for you to get information, and so you're going to get the information in a way that works for you in the time that you have available to you, right? So this relationship that we have kind of put together where we're like, intellect equals like reading. Reading equals intellect. But in fact, if we look at like intelligence, intellect, if we look at, well, first of all, there are multiple kinds of intelligences, as we now know, and I am ironically reading The Musician's Mind, and there's some really very good information in there about different kinds of about the movement toward intelligences and recognizing different kinds of intelligences and the movement away from intellect and intelligence only being related to academia and only related to what we do with reading, right? So intelligence and intellect has everything to do with how you use the information that you have in your brain. It has nothing to do with how you get the information into your brain. So you getting the information, you acquiring knowledge is up to you. How do you want to acquire the knowledge? And should you have some kind of long form knowledge acquisition, like some long form things in your knowledge acquisition? Probably. Yeah, probably. We can't get all the information we likely want to get in like short form, in short forms. But if you happen to be raising kids, or if you happen to have like an incredibly busy studio, or you happen to be doing, if you happen to have all these multiple things in your life, maybe short form knowledge acquisition is the way that you need to do it right now, and that's fine. All good. But at some point, getting long form knowledge or long form content, getting your knowledge, doing knowledge acquisition through long form content, that's cool. It doesn't mean that you have to do it through reading in order to be considered intelligent. What is the intelligent part, or the intellect part, is about how we process that knowledge, what we do with it once it's in our brain, how we turn it around in our head. Critical thinking is not about the fact that I read this book. Critical thinking is about what I do with the information I have in my head, how I think about the information. Doesn't have to do with I can get the information any way I want. It doesn't have to be through reading, is all I'm saying. So, and one of the things that I wanted to also be clear about, which, I've talked about before as well, one of the things that I also want to just be really clear about is the fact that getting the information is just the first step. Getting the information is only the first step. If you're working to get information to be a better voice teacher, getting the voice pit information, so for example, getting the anatomy and physiology information, that's fantastic. And, I have a course that you can do, and I have the live version of it is coming up. Yeah, I think so, Bianca. Bianca says, could we extend that to how we responsibly pass on that info? Absolutely. I think all of this has to do with perhaps the least important part, perhaps, is not how we acquire the knowledge, right? It's about what we do with it once we have it, and how we think it through, and how we think. And then how we process and how we learn that information. And by learn, I mean how we get it into our memory, and how we have it in our brains. And then yes, how do we distribute that information, and what is useful? In what ways do we like to distribute that information? I'm an information distributor. That is part of my personality. I like to give the information, obviously. So how do I get that information out? That's all part of it. And what coming back to the anatomy and physiology, for example, or even understanding, best practice teaching, or understanding best practices for teaching, or understanding what's happening in education, and then application to the voice studio. I'm going to be talking about that with two of my colleagues at the NATS conference that's coming up. So this information, understanding this information is one part of it, but it's in the application as voice teachers. It's in the application in our voice studio that we really do learn it, right? Or at least I should say that's one way that we process it well. And you don't necessarily need to know anatomy and physiology of the voice in order to be an effective voice teacher. You don't necessarily need to have that information. You can be a very effective voice teacher without having anatomy and physiology or an understanding of the vocal instrument. And now, I think that we might want to, dive in a little bit as voice teachers and get a little bit more of that information. Of course I do. I think that's only going to support your teaching. I think it's only going to, bring you more clarity as a voice teacher. It's going to help you to support your students. I think that's all very good. And like I said, the same kind of information. I'm doing the spring break intensive next week. I'm talking about neurodiversity, not next week, 2 weeks from now, talking about neurodiversity in the voice studio. This is information that, are you going to be able to teach well and effectively without this information? Sure you are, absolutely. Having this information though, and I'm delivering it in a class setting, which is like one of my favorite ways to learn information, is through lecture. Like that's one of my very favorite ways to learn information, is to be in a class, and also discussion. I love class and discussion. That's like my favorite thing. So like, that's part of the reason I do the classes I do, because I love them myself. So there you go. But also, having that class information means that I'm able to, as a voice teacher, I'm able to take in this information, tons of information, and then I'm able to kind of like apply as I go through my teaching. As I start to like, that's how I can start to process it, right? So I start to process this information. Could I have read a book? Are there books out there about neurodiversity, not necessarily in the voice studio? Are there books out there about how ADHD works and traits of autism and understanding neurodiversity and and creating more inclusive spaces? Of course there are. There are tons of books out there about that, and there are lots of people teaching about that. I mean, there's tons. And do you have time to read all the books? Maybe not, right? And do you love getting information that way? Maybe not, and that's fine. You can get the information in a class. You can go to a conference. You can listen to a podcast. You can listen. I mean, there's just so many ways to acquire the information. So, all of that said, there is a real strain of ableism. There's some misogyny. There's some classism that really comes down through and really informs this idea around reading being the best way to acquire information. This idea is very much informed by who first got to read, who was considered worthy to read, who was considered worthy to be educated, who was, who had access to books. This really does kind of inform the way that we think about things now, and the way that we consider, the reasons we preference reading now as like the best way to acquire information, and also the way that we kind of marry reading with being an intellectual. Being an intellectual or being, intelligent, right? So we kind of marry those two, and that there are lots of, roots to those that are just, that we just don't need to, we need to examine, and that we just don't need to, we can stop that now. We know that if you have a processing difference, or if you have an attentional difference or divergence, if your brain works in a slightly different way, or if you just don't have time, you're allowed to not have time to read long form books right now in your life. You're allowed. Gosh, the light balance is crazy in here. I apologize, but then that doesn't, you're allowed to get your information however works for you. Whatever way works for you. All right, that's all I'm going to say today. Like I said, the spring break intensive starts on the 4th of April. So that's in like a week. Well, it's in like 10 days. So you're so welcome, Bianca. You're so welcome. Starts in like 10 days. So it starts a week from Monday. And that is 5 90-minute classes. If you can't make them live, 4 of the classes will be available by replay. The final panel discussion is not available by replay. But 90-minute classes talking about the traits of ADHD and how those can show up in the voice studio in the singers we work with. the autistic traits and how those can show up in the voice studio and with the singers we work with, talking about creating more inclusive voice studios through a neurodiversity lens or a neurodiversity affirming lens. Then we're talking about teaching while neurodivergent, myself and Elizabeth Berry, who is an autistic voice teacher and business owner and performer. We will be on that panel. And then the final panel, final discussion panel is neurodiversity in general. So we're going to have, that'll be open for questions and communication, and a neurodiversity affirming therapist, Dory Ziener, who is here in Toronto, has a clinic here in Toronto, and who works with neurodivergent folks all day long. That's what she does. Supports and affirms neurodivergent folks all day long as a professional career. She's going to be on that panel as well. So then we'll have, it'll be sort of like a moderated discussion, kind of like what you would see in a conference. So that is coming up. And early bird rates, I've extended them until the end of March. So just about a week from now, actually, is when those early bird rates will come up. Will not be extended any longer? Sure, let's put it that way. So if you're interested in that information, and if you love to learn that way, that's a way to do it. It is there for you. Take good care, and remember, if you're feeling a little bit of, if readers are the leaders, we all have the same 24 hours in the day, and you'll make time for the things you really want to do. If any of those sayings are giving you some guilt or some shame or kind of like talking to you a little bit, consider that maybe you can flick them right off your shoulder. Just consider. All right, take good care. Here.